All right, so today we're looking at something, well, let's just say it sounds like it's straight out of the onion.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Could Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, could he actually become the next Speaker of the House?
You got to admit, it does have that
Mhm.
what if quality that just grabs your attention.
Oh, it totally does. And you know what? It's actually generating serious buzz out there. We've got a whole mix of news articles and some pretty heated discussions on social media to sort through. But don't worry, we're going to navigate all those opinions objectively. But I think it's safe to say, get ready for some potential fireworks.
Think of this deep dive as, well, as our attempt to understand how this wild idea even came about in the first place. Who's pushing for it and why,
Yeah.
and what those ripple effects could actually be. This is about way more than just one political position. This could reshape the whole game.
Exactly. So where did this whole Elon Musk for speaker thing even come from?
Well, the spark came from Senator Rand Paul, a Kentucky Republican. He's known for his libertarian views and, his whole drain the swamp rhetoric. And he just casually dropped this idea on X, formerly Twitter, which, I mean, come on, that makes it even more intriguing, given that Musk owns the platform.
Oh, that's interesting. So he's using Musk's own platform to put the idea out there. Talk about strategic.
Right. It's very calculated. And then Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Georgia Republican, she quickly jumped on board, adding fuel to the fire, you could say. She represents a more populist wing of the Republican Party, and her support suggests that this idea might actually gain some traction with a certain segment of the GOP.
So it's not just some fringe idea floating around out there. There are actual political players backing this.
Exactly. And the timing. No coincidence. This all came up right in the thick of this government shutdown showdown.
Yeah, this proposed spending bill is causing some serious drama. We've got President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Vance demanding like huge cuts, and then you've got, a whole bipartisan group supporting the current bill. Talk about a political pressure cooker.
It is. And then Elon Musk enters the scene. Trump appointed him to co-lead this new Department of Government Efficiency, which they've nicknamed DOGE, by the way. And, well, Musk publicly slammed the spending bill. He even called for the removal of any lawmaker who votes for it. It's a pretty aggressive stance.
He's not holding back, that's for sure. I feels like he's adding fuel to the fire, shaking things up in the House.
He is, and this intervention, it likely weakened Speaker Johnson's position,
Hmm.
making him more vulnerable to these kinds of challenges.
So the chaos from the spending bill fight, mixed with Musk's very public power move, it created the perfect breeding ground for this Speaker of the House idea.
Now, the big question is, can someone like Musk, who's never been elected to anything, can he actually be the Speaker?
I was wondering the same thing. It seems like it would completely break with tradition.
It would, but if you look closely at the Constitution, there's actually no rule that says the Speaker has to be a member of the House. It's just something that's always been done historically.
Wait, so it's actually possible? That's wild.
Legally speaking, yes. And there have been other times when people, they floated this idea of outsiders for speeder. Colin Powell's name was even thrown around back in 2015.
I remember that, but this feels different. Like it could actually gain momentum this time.
The political climate is definitely it's prime for disruption, and Musk with his massive influence and his habit of making, bold statements, he fits right into that narrative.
But that's what has so many people worried, right? This idea of Musk having all that power without ever being elected. It's unsettling.
It's a legitimate concern. Democrats lawmakers have been especially vocal about it. Representative Maxwell Frost, he called Musk the unelected co-president.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that paints a pretty vivid picture, wouldn't you say?
It's a scary thought, to be honest. And it makes those comparisons to Trump's first term and how he used Twitter even more unsettling. Imagine that dynamic, but with Musk in a position of real authority.
It raises some serious questions. Would Musk in this role just amplify that kind of disruptive, unpredictable style of politics?
Okay, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that this actually happens. What would it actually mean for Musk to be speaker? What kind of power are we even talking about here?
Well, for starters, the speaker is third in line for the presidency.
Wait, so Elon Musk could potentially be the president of the United States?
That's where things get a little tricky. Remember, Musk was born in South Africa, so even if he could become speaker, the presidency is likely out of reach because of, those constitutional requirements.
Okay, that's a relief. But even without the presidency, the speaker still has a ton of influence, right?
Absolutely. The speaker controls the legislative agenda, decides which bills even get voted on, and basically sets the tone for everything that happens in the House. And remember, we're talking about a House with a very slim Republican majority, so his role would be even more pivotal.
So what would a Musk-led House even look like? What would be his top priorities?
Well, if we look at his role with DOGE, we could expect, a huge emphasis on government efficiency
Hmm.
and spending cuts.
Hmm.
He might also try to push for a more tech-driven approach to governing, which, that could have both positive and negative consequences.
That's an interesting point. What do you think, listener? What would a Musk-led House prioritize? How might his involvement change how the public views the government and even the whole political process?
It's a scenario that forces us to think about how power is shifting, not just within the government itself, but also between elected officials, unelected individuals like Musk, and the public.
It's almost like we're stepping into a real-life episode of Succession, but with the fate of the country hanging in the balance.
And it's not just about Musk's personality or his political views. This whole situation, it shines a light on a much bigger question. How does power work in the digital age?
That's a really good point. Think about it. Musk has this incredible platform with X, formerly Twitter. He can shape narratives, sway public opinion, and even pressure elected officials, all with a few tweets. It's a level of influence that's almost unheard of.
And that's what raises concerns about accountability. If someone like Musk can exert this much influence without ever being elected, what does that say about the future of our democracy?
Are we moving toward a system where the people with the most power aren't the ones we vote for, but the ones with the loudest voices and the deepest pockets?
This Musk situation brings that question into sharp focus. It's been simmering for a while now, but this feels like a turning point.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. We've talked about how this Musk for Speaker idea came to be and what the potential fallout could be. But what does this whole thing tell us about where American politics is right now?
Well, it seems like we're entering a period of intense political volatility, where traditional norms and institutions are being challenged, and the lines between business, media, and politics are getting blurrier by the day.
It's like the old playbook has been thrown out the window, which, I mean, it can be exciting and terrifying all at the same time, depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. On one hand, it creates opportunities for new voices and new ways of thinking to emerge, but on the other hand, it opens the door to chaos and instability.
Speaking of instability, let's bring it back to the government shutdown for a minute. How does this Musk situation factor into that? It seems like it's just adding another layer of complexity to an already explosive situation.
Absolutely. Musk's involvement, his public stance against the spending bill, and his call for lawmakers to be voted out, it definitely threw a wrench into the negotiations. It gave the hardliners in the Republican Party more leverage and probably made it much harder for Speaker Johnson to find a compromise.
So he's playing chess with the whole government, using his influence to push his own agenda. And it seems like it's working.
To a certain extent, yes. He shifted the conversation, put pressure on key players, and managed to inject his own priorities into the political debate. Whether that's a good or bad thing depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
But it's undeniable that he's having an impact.
It's a stark reminder that power doesn't always reside where we think it does.
Yeah.
And the lines between elected officials and powerful unelected figures like Musk are getting increasingly blurred.
It also highlights how important social media has become as a political battleground. Musk's control of X, formerly Twitter, gives him an incredibly powerful voice in the political arena, and he's not afraid to use it.
So where do we go from here? What are the possible scenarios that could play out? Is there even a chance that this Speaker of the House idea actually gains enough support to become reality?
Well, it's still early in the game, and the political landscape is constantly shifting.
Yeah.
But here are a few things to watch. First, how will Speaker Johnson respond to this challenge to his leadership? Will he try to appease the pro-Musk faction within the Republican Party? Or will he stand his ground and risk a full-blown rebellion?
And what about the Democrats? They've been pretty outspoken in their opposition to Musk. Will they try to block this somehow, or are their hands tied?
Their options are limited, especially with a Republican majority in the House. But they could try to turn public opinion against Musk, highlighting his lack of experience in government and the potential for conflicts of interest.
It's like watching a political thriller unfold in real time. The stakes are incredibly high, the players are unpredictable, and the ending is anyone's guess. It's enough to make your head spin.
It is. And it reminds us that we're living in extraordinary times. The rise of figures like Musk, the power of social media, and the erosion of traditional political norms are all converging to create a political landscape unlike anything we've ever seen before.
So bringing it back to our listeners, what should they be paying attention to as this story develops?
I think it's crucial to pay attention to how this situation affects the balance of power in Washington. Will Musk's influence continue to grow? Or will there be pushback from both Democrats and Republicans? Also, keep an eye on how this plays out in the media. Will Musk's supporters amplify his message? Or will there be a critical examination of his role in the political process?
And maybe most importantly, think about what this all means for the future of American democracy. If unelected figures like Musk can wield this much power, what does that say about the role of the people in our system of government?
Those are the questions we as a society need to be grappling with right now. The answers won't be easy, but we can't afford to ignore these questions. It really is, it's fascinating and yeah, potentially unsettling.
Okay, so we've talked about how this Musk for Speaker idea, how it kind of bubbled up and what some of the consequences might be. But let's go a little deeper on that. Specifically, what would it actually mean for Musk to be speaker in terms of, actual day-to-day power?
Well, you got to remember, the speaker isn't just some figurehead.
Yeah.
They have immense control over the whole legislative process. They decide what bills even come up for a vote, set the agenda for the entire House, and even have a lot of influence over committee assignments.
So he wouldn't just be some talking head. He'd actually be shaping, like, what laws get made.
Exactly. And in a House that's as divided as this one is, with this razor-thin Republican majority, Musk's role as Speaker would be even more crucial. He'd essentially be like the deciding vote on almost every issue.
Wow, that's a lot of power for someone who's never held elected office before.
It is, and it raises a whole host of questions about how he would use that power, what his priorities would be, and how his leadership style might clash with the existing culture of the House.
Let's talk about his priorities for a second. We know he's all about efficiency, cutting government waste, but what else might he focus on?
If we look at his work with DOGE, his comments on Twitter, and just his general philosophy, we can kind of start to piece together a potential agenda.
Yeah.
It seems likely he'd push for a more streamlined and technologically advanced government. Maybe even try to automate certain functions.
So less bureaucracy, more algorithms.
Potentially, yeah. He's also, he's a big proponent of space exploration and renewable energy. So we might see those areas get a lot more attention and funding.
It's interesting to think about how someone from outside the traditional political sphere, how they might approach these issues. It could be, a breath of fresh air, or it could be a recipe for disaster.
Right. There's no guarantee that his ideas would translate well to the messy reality of government. And then there's the question of his temperament. I mean, Musk is known for being, outspoken, impulsive, even confrontational at times.
He's definitely not afraid to ruffle some feathers. But would that kind of style work in the House of Representatives?
Yeah.
Where, compromise and diplomacy are usually the name of the game.
That's a really important question. His approach could be seen as refreshing and bold, or it could lead to gridlock and dysfunction.
And then there's the whole issue of his connection to Twitter. Or X, as it's called now.
Yeah.
Can you imagine him tweeting out policy proposals or attacking his political opponents during a debate?
It's not hard to imagine, and that brings us back to this question of accountability. How do you hold someone accountable who's used to operating with the speed and informality of social media when they're suddenly in charge of one of the most powerful institutions of the world?
It's almost like this scenario is forcing us to rethink the whole concept of what it means to be a leader in the 21st century. The old rules just don't seem to apply anymore.
I think you're right. We're in uncharted territory here. The lines between business, media, and politics are blurring, and traditional notions of power and influence are being challenged.
So if we accept that this Musk for Speaker idea isn't just, some crazy fantasy, what are the most likely scenarios that could play out from here?
Well, one possibility is that this whole thing just, fizzles out. Maybe it was just a trial balloon, floated by Rand Paul to gauge public reaction.
No.
Maybe the Republican establishment pushes back and rallies around Speaker Johnson. Or maybe Musk himself decides he's not actually interested in the job.
That's true. It's easy to forget that he's got a lot on his plate already, running Tesla, SpaceX, and now X. But what if this idea actually, what if it gains traction? What if he decides to go for it?
Then things could get really, really interesting. We'd likely see a huge fight within the Republican Party, with some factions supporting Musk and others, defending the traditional power structure.
And what about the Democrats? How would they react to this whole thing?
They'd probably be unified in their opposition to Musk. They'd frame him as an unqualified, out of touch billionaire who's trying to buy his way into power.
It would be a political battle for the ages.
Absolutely, and the outcome would have massive implications, not just for the balance of power in Washington, but also for the direction of the country as a whole.
This one event could set a precedent for how power is wielded and who gets to hold it in the future.
Exactly. It's not just about one person or one political position. It's about the fundamental rules of the game and how they're being rewritten right before our eyes.
It's almost like we're watching a political revolution unfold in real time. And the question is, are we ready for it?
That's the million-dollar question. Are we prepared for a world where the most powerful people aren't necessarily the ones we elect, but the ones who control the platforms, the narratives, and the flow of information?
It's a daunting thought, but it's a reality we need to start grappling with.
And that brings us back to our listener. We've explored the genesis of this idea, the potential power dynamics at play, and the possible scenarios that could unfold. But now we want to turn it over to you.
What do you think about all of this?
Does the idea of Elon Musk as Speaker of the House, does it intrigue you, worry you, or maybe a little bit of both?
And what do you think it says about the state of American politics and even American society as a whole?
We're diving deep into this topic because we believe it's important to have these conversations, to think critically about the forces that are shaping our world, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue about the kind of future we want to create.
So take a moment to reflect on what you've heard today and consider the question: if this were to become our reality, what would it mean for you, for your community, and for the future of this country?
It's a lot to process, we know. And we're right there with you, trying to make sense of it all. But sometimes the best way to understand something is to dive right in and explore it from all angles.
And that's exactly what we're doing here on the Deep Dive. Okay, so let's say, just for argument's sake, this wild scenario actually plays out. Musk overcomes all the hurdles, gets the support he needs, and actually becomes Speaker. What would that kind of power shift mean for the average person?
Well, if his track record's anything to go by, we could see some pretty big changes, and not all of them might be popular. Musk's all about efficiency and disruption, but those concepts don't always translate smoothly to the world of government.
Right. His style it's very Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. But governing is more like, it's like trying to steer a giant ship. You can't just make sudden turns without considering all the potential consequences.
Exactly. There are checks and balances for a reason. Plus, Musk is known for being pretty impulsive, sometimes even reckless, you could say. Imagine that kind of decision-making applied to things like healthcare, national security, or even just everyday regulations. It's a bit unnerving.
Yeah, a late-night tweet could turn into a major international incident pretty quickly. And speaking of Twitter, or X, as it's called now, how do you think his ownership of that platform would affect his role as Speaker?
That's a huge question mark, and it's one that has a lot of people worried. I mean, Musk, he already uses X to shape narratives and influence public opinion. Imagine him wielding that kind of power while also, holding the gavel in the House. It could create a very dangerous concentration of influence.
He could bypass traditional media, control the message, and potentially even silence dissenting voices. It's a slippery slope towards authoritarianism.
It is. And it raises serious concerns about freedom of speech, transparency, and the whole concept of a free press. If the Speaker of the House can also control, the dominant social media platform, it undermines the very foundations of our democracy.
So Musk as Speaker might not just change how the government operates; it could fundamentally alter the relationship between the government and the people.
It really could, and it's not just about the potential for abuse of power. It's also about the erosion of trust. If people start to see the government as just an extension of a billionaire's personal agenda, it could lead to widespread cynicism and disengagement.
That's a recipe for political instability. And speaking of instability, what do you think this whole situation says about the state of American democracy in general?
Well, it suggests that our system is facing some very real challenges. The rise of social media, the blurring of lines between business and politics, and the growing influence of unelected figures like Musk. All of that, it all points to a shifting power dynamic. The old rules just don't seem to apply anymore.
It feels like we're at crossroads. We can either adapt and find new ways to safeguard our democracy in this new landscape, or we risk sliding towards a system where power is concentrated in the hands of a few and the voice of the people is increasingly marginalized.
I think that's a great way to put it. This isn't just about Elon Musk. It's about a much larger trend that's reshaping our political landscape, and it's up to us to decide what kind of future we want to create.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave our listeners with a few final thoughts.
First, stay informed. This story is still unfolding, and the stakes are incredibly high. Pay attention to how it develops and what the potential consequences might be.
Second, don't be afraid to have these difficult conversations. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues about what this all means. Debate the issues, challenge assumptions, and try to understand different perspectives.
And finally, remember that the future of our democracy is ultimately in our hands. We have the power to shape it, to protect it, and to ensure that it remains a system that truly represents the will of the people.
So as always, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.